I just wanted to pop in with a video of an idea that I had, and I was thinking it's similar to another video that I did a while back, and I can't remember all of what I was articulating in there, but I was expressing something that I think that if you appreciate, like, I think some things are not exactly as, like, one thing that I've come to appreciate, and it's some of what I was articulating with the last two videos about the system, is that um uh um a lot of times we really mess up, and there's a lot lost of living, and the opportunity to the, the the opportunity to live, the experience of living, the manner of living, and the further opportunity to live. A lot of that is compromised and wasted, specifically because we give way too much credit to people. Maybe just even because we exist along the lines of credit, but we extend way too much credit to other people, and that's a lot of our undoing. That we take other people as what we take a lot of things on the face. Even people that look into things, that would think themselves as that research things, and a lot of things, we take a lot of things, we lose a lot for assuming. We really do. We lose a lot. Like, even if you're not having, like, say you're a public space, and you're not having a good time, and or things are not fun, like people are not having fun, people are not being funny, it's because they're assuming too much. So they're saying, like, they're not, so like a lot of the things that we say, they're really like good opportunities for humor, because but we assume things. Like, an example is that I was at a store with my family member a couple of days ago, and this clerk was, there's a man ahead of her, and you could tell he was probably like, he was a seasoned man. He was like maybe in his late 50s, early 60s. I've worked with enough people as a personal care attendant, that I have a sense of like what 50 and 60 and 70 looks like in terms of like a person's vitality and disposition, and like in their facial, their features. But the lady was like 8391, and on the surface, like, if you're taking things at face value, and like you're assuming like this is another boring time, we're all standing around, and she just said 8391. But I was like, he's 83. You say he's 83? That's, I don't believe you. I call cab. He's, damn, you look, he's like 83 and she's 91. I was pointing to my aunt. 8391. And so like they're getting, she was chuckling at that. Like, the that humor is a good litmus test for like social status, because you can make a joke like that, and render it with like timing, and like a little bit of charisma, and like people can appreciate it, they can be tickled by it, they can have a good time, they can enjoy it, or they can not say nothing, and they're not even gonna deign to try to laugh. I actually don't think it's healthy to fake laugh. I think each time you do something you don't want to do, or you make a gesture that you don't mean or feel like, I think you lose some of your life force, and you actually age a little bit. I think each time we say or do something that's not really who we are, I think we age in that moment. So it may be good that people don't entertain, like, when they're not willing to be entertained. But a lot of people could as easily not appreciate a joke like that as they would appreciate it. But these people were appreciating that, and like some people I didn't even know were standing behind me were laughing. And when I turn around, they wouldn't have been laughing, like, unless they had a good reason to laugh. But they appreciated that one. And then when he left, I was like, hey, "See you later, man. You look good for your age. Keep it up." But uh, I can't, I'm eating right now, but I look conceited. Like, I just said this and that joke. I wasn't trying to look conceited, but I was actually munching on some crackers right before I turned on this video, so that's why I was doing that. And sometimes when I'm making these videos, I actually like, I kind of like, I pause for a moment, like there's actually nothing going on in my mind. Like, I'm talking this and that, and it looks like I got something going on in my mind, but there's actually not a damn thing going on in my mind, and I'm like waiting till I get half a clue of something else to run with. But but that's an example of how we take things at face value, but there's actually an opportunity there for good humor, good energy, rapport, banter, with your good countrymen, but there's actually an opportunity for inroads there, for an experience first, but then inroads second, where anyone standing there that I was having in earshot, if that I may or may not frequent that store again anytime soon, but if I were to, and I were to start beginning bumping into those people, now I'm starting to experience community now and actually create a community. And in the true sense of that, a neighborhood, we have the hood now, but we don't have a lot of neighbors because we're not talking to each other and engaging like neighbors would. But so we have the opportunity for a neighborhood now, so I could become part of a neighborhood like that. But then also potentially, that could spin off into different opportunities and outcomes that could amount to either relationships that can turn into people living, being born, or the standpoint to have enough viability, the livelihood to have a viability to have relationships, and then people being born. So that's an example of how a lot can be lost for taking things, for taking things on the surface and assuming things, and can be gained for just opening our eyes and our ears and our mind and just taking in what we're actually taking in and engaging that with that creatively, also without being locked into gridlocked into a sense of linear time as we're handed that. Because I think that, like, people would say, oh, that's great timing, that's spontaneous. It's not necessarily incredible if you just recognize that we potentially could have been getting over on by the way that these clocks were conveniently placed in these. A lot of us had horrible experiences at school and would have liked to be anywhere else but school when we were in school. But when we did get a little bit of a reprieve from that, release from that, it was around a clock that had been on a wall. Is that not training? um, uh, Punishment and reward, is that not training? So is a clock, and it's the reward is better when it's a little bit. So a lot of punishment, a lot of sentences, dictionaries, math, reading stuff that you didn't want to read, research paper, all kinds of stuff you don't want to be doing. But then just the clock just ever so slightly reaches that top point when the day is over, the class is over, it's recess, it's lunch, whatnot. That's potent training. But we don't look at our training sometimes as though it may not be the best thing for us. And that, like, man, school sucked, but you're here at 5 o'clock. But, oh, it was 2 o'clock. Do you know they came over at 2 o'clock? It was 9 o'clock. They were there for 30 minutes. Like, so we're all badasses now, and we're all like independent, and we're all bigger than that, and we all think we're not brainwashed by that school that we came from and all this and that. But it's 9 o'clock now. It's 9:30 now. Do you know it was 9:15? We were there for 15 minutes. So like that's an example of how we don't see how our training is operating, but it's compromising and even confiscating some of our opportunities and our experiences and what actually takes form. So, but what I was gonna say is that, but a lot of things are lost for our implicit faith in authority, or even just thinking that people are confident, or things that people that created things that we use were competent, or were competent enough to appreciate a circumstance we'd be in with something that they conceived before we got into that circumstance. That's a lot of the difference to me between like a professional and like someone that's a little bit rookie, is that the professional knows that things are going to go to shit. Whoever said things are going to go well is effing bogus, because things are going to go to shit. That's a that's a veteran. But and I can't speak like a veteran, but I've been around some veterans, and I don't mean military veterans necessarily. That can be professional, a veteran of a profession. But I a little bit got off the. Oh, but so some things are not exactly how they were rendered to us in these different training, that a lot of our training and education, for lack of a better word, is outmoded and was not comprehensive as it was presented to us. One is that I think that when we're breathing, we're doing more and different than what we're taught, because we're taught as though breathing is a form of nutrition. Like, we're drawing nutrition through the air in the form of oxygen, sustenance, and we're releasing nutrition in the form of carbon dioxide back to the, like, the found the plants, the flora. But I think that when we're breathing, it may be more along the lines of charging and magnetizing ourselves, because if you appreciate the body, the human body is very magnetic, but electromagnetic. It has electromagnetic functions and activity, but the and also I wanted to say, sometimes when people compliment you, that can and they don't mean it, or they don't completely respect you, but they're complimenting you, that can also stifle certain things. Because I had someone compliment my vocabulary recently, but I noticed that a lot of times, like when people compliment me, but they also aren't interested in like my work, like, so I've had like some people compliment my music, but I don't think they're interested in me as a person or my music, or they complimented my vocabulary, but I don't think they're interested in me or what I have to say. That compliment can stifle you a little bit. So it's just like a distraction. So this person was complimenting my vocabulary, but I think that sometimes that very compliment, it can actually stifle the vocabulary, because when you go to reach for a word, the kind of subtle, very abstract, fine level of thought that you need to call upon a word, you're distracted by, like, let me think of a word. Oh yeah, but I'm good at thinking of words because someone just told me, it's still in my mind that someone gave me a compliment. That actually can be, it can compromise. So a lot of times the people who are giving you compliments in your life might have been the exact people that weren't appreciating you, or would not like to see you succeed. But um when we speak, it's called, according to India, it's a higher fact. We have different faculties we have different capacity and faculty of functioning as people that can go way far beyond what you normally appreciate a human being as, or capable of. And when you're actually drawing vocabulary and enunciating spontaneously, that's way broader and more sophisticated than you can normally appreciate, such that in the East, they attribute it to a deity named Devani. So that's actually a faculty of mind that's higher, but it's called Devani when it's operating fluently, to speak fluently. And but I think that it is very subtle, it is very subtle and delicate, because powerful things are like that. So sometimes a compliment can interfere with that. So I just wanted to say that they say in the sometimes they say, like, say it out loud and you get it out of the way. So that's why I was saying that. But I think that when we're breathing, we're doing more than just drawing in nutrition. We're actually like magnetizing ourselves, like, and polarizing ourselves, because magnets are polar, north and south pole of a magnet. The human, like, the if you were to appreciate the heartbeat, when they take your heart, when they take your blood pressure, there's a, like, systole and diastole. I don't know which one that is, but when they have two numbers like that for your heartbeat, that's because there's a polarization in your heart, and your heart works along the lines of polarity. That's how it's able to function like that. So you actually need hot and bad, good and gold, good and positive, negative, good and bad, light and dark, hot and cold. You need all that to make life viable, but also the human body. So I think that some of our breathing is actually a form of magnetizing, and whatever effort you're taking to breathe in air, the charge that you get from that breath, and then the power that you get from that, and then releasing that breath to be balanced again, because as you take, you must give to take, and take to give. That the energy, so that you expend ever so little effort to breathe, but you are also charged for that effort, and you are compensated for that breath in the form of vitality. But you also did still lose something, because you had to expend effort. And effort, I think that any effort, you're compensated for effort, but you're still exactly losing something for effort. And that might be what aging is. But you're spending a small amount to breathe in, and you're getting compensated for that in vitality, and then giving that back to stay balanced and reciprocal. But it amounts to like charging yourself, and it's not necessarily in and itself nutrition, as though you were, because if you're nutrition, it would have to be, if it were nutrition, it would have to be digested and also excreted. So yes, you excrete it when you excrete the oxygen in the form of carbon dioxide, but still, if you were taking in that much oxygen as though it was like you were digesting it, consuming it, there would have to be some byproduct for there's a byproduct for all consumption. So you sometimes I say things like I've done research, but I sometimes when it sounds true enough, I'll just say it like it's real. So, but I think there'd be a byproduct to consumption. So a cost and a byproduct to consumption. The cost would be the effort. The byproduct would be the carbon dioxide, but it would still have to accumulate and build up if you're taking in that much nutrition daily for your entire existence. But we don't have like we don't excrete something like a hairball of oxygen. Like so maybe you could say that some of our actual excrescence like feces and urine, you could say maybe it has something of what we're breathing in factor into our feces. We don't always appreciate what else actually is in our feces. We think, okay, our feces must be our 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 food that we eat, the bad parts of the food. But I don't think it's that simple. I think that it might be a lot of the actual energy that we experience in a day. A lot of it's not good. So sometimes this is gonna sound crude. I don't mean to be nasty about this, but sometimes when you're like having a bowel movement, you actually feel refreshed for having a bowel movement. You feel like a new person having a bowel movement. But also, when you're having a bowel movement, sometimes there's a little bit that doesn't quite. I'm gonna look different for saying this comment, but when you're having a bowel movement, there's a little bit of it sometimes that doesn't quite drop the way that you'd like it to, and it's like damn, because like I'm at work and this is gonna take a lot of toilet paper, like a hell of a lot of toilet paper if this don't drop right. But also I might not get all of it with the toilet paper, so this is gonna mess up my day if it don't drop all the way right. If we're honest, we all have that thought sometimes when we're doing our business. But sometimes when that last little bit drops, that relief that you get, that damn, I'm not gonna get messed over with like you having to use a hell of a lot of toilet paper. Damn, I got that off. Good. Everyone's had that thought a little bit. But if you watch yourself, there's actually a sensation of purity of you actually really do are somewhat purified when you have a bowel movement, but also when that last little piece gets up off of you. Damn, good. But you actually feel kind of good. You feel vitalized. If you watch yourself, you feel vitalized, energized when you have a bowel movement, but also when you get that last little drop, that last little, that last little s'more, that last little Hershey's that you didn't want all the Hershey bar. You got that last little bit of Hershey off. What I meant to say is that that's an example of how that actually might be the energy of the other day and it's not pure. So you actually got a little bit of impure bad energy out of you. And now you actually are vitalized and better because that energy is out of you. Similar with urine, but not quite not as overwhelming with urine, but similar with urine where you had to go like damn you're in a movie theater like man this is interesting, like if I have to go right now I'm gonna miss some of this movie, and I don't want to look like a punk being the first one to walk to the restroom after we all drink all that pop knowing that we all gotta use the bathroom. But damn, this is starting to hurt, and it's like a little bit of like it's starting to hurt. Like I could get this could hurt someone if you don't if to hold it too long. So then you go to the restroom and you really do feel like a new person. That's probably similar where you're getting some of the energy. It's not just the bad byproduct of the food you ate, but also the energy of the bad byproduct of the food you ate, and also the day that you had and that you were able to have prior based on the food you ate and the things that were maybe not good about that day and the exchanges that you had and the thoughts that you had that weren't cool. Maybe some of the things that you breathed in that weren't cool also gets up out of you. But still, I think that breathing is more than just nutrition in the sense of like taking in oxygen because it would have to build up and accumulate somehow. But I think so it's charging us also, and then we also charge the atmosphere in different ways by our participation in it, and our living charges the atmosphere. So maybe sometimes I think that like when lightning is going on, you have a lightning storm, that's some of what's in the air. So there can be static in the air. Like sometimes people are in a room and it's like everyone's having a party. Yeah. But it's kind of stuffy up in there. It's like it can be like cool if it's a cool party, or it can be kind of whack if it's a whack party and you don't want to be there. It's kind of stuffy now, all these people. or you're waiting in line somewhere, like in a restaurant, and they have like a small storefront facing the store. It's kind of stuffy up in here. There's a lot of people up in here, but the atmosphere is charged like that, or people are fighting. Like, damn, it's pissed off. Or you walk into somewhere after they broke up a fight. Damn, there's something in the air. That might be some of our breathing, like, because how are people huffing and puffing when they're pissed off or whatnot, or when they're bored, they're breathing slower, and now there's like a stagnation in the air. We're charging the air like that. But sometimes I think that all that goes on in a day, in a city, in an area, that charges the atmosphere, such as, and it's being balanced when the lightning is going crazy like that. So some of that crazy activity of the lightning, what the hell is that, and what's that from? Some of it might actually be our attitudes and our statements, and then our breathing based on our attitudes and statements and conduct, and our conduct that actually charges the air with stuff like lightning. These are just, I'm just thinking ideas out loud, and it's no more credible than a pet theory. It's no more than a pet is a relative. No more is this official than a pet theory. I don't mean, I'm just joking with that, but so or no more than a family is a pet is a family member is my theory authoritative as in pet theory. But I think that also you don't always necessarily appreciate what your blood may be, because we all know that we all know that your I can't tell if this is still recording. So we all know that your blood is important, and that you don't exist without blood. Just like you don't exist without breathing, you also don't exist without your blood. Similar. The breathing is, we are taught that the breathing is mitigated and filtered and dispensed and conveyed to the body by means of the blood. But it's a little bit different, has different properties and than the blood in itself. But we're taught that the breathing gets exactly onto the blood, and then the blood gets into the body. That might be true, but it might be also subtler and more profound and deeper than it is on the surface, conveyed in just in terms of molecules. But then, and even but then the blood, I think, is that, so yes, the breathing, the air, the atmosphere, which is what you're breathing in, it's called air, but it's actually atmosphere. When you're breathing in the atmosphere, which is polarized and charged, it can be proved scientifically. When you're breathing that in, it's being mitigated and filtered through the blood, but also existing somewhat as the blood. So what is the blood? The blood is what's in the blood. What's in the blood? The oxygen and carbon dioxide, largely as is. So what? There's nothing more crucial and important than blood. But what's in the blood that makes the blood keep us alive is the charge from the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. But I'm saying in terms that can be a charge, because actually there is no such thing as oxygen or carbon dioxide or anything. Those are names and associations and actually a form of prejudice when you there, because it's like a designation. When you name something, you're designating it. When you name a molecule, you're designating it. These designations may help you to understand it, but it's as they have been applied and overlaid, they are a form of bias. And even your understanding of something, even as you're able to manipulate it and with facility to an objective, to an outcome, not a perfect outcome, because science still has a gray area, but as you're able to render and manipulate something to an outcome by designations that you use as names, both your understanding and also the designations are a form of bias, because they are preconceived and ultimate, and therefore limiting, and therefore by limiting something, you may control it to a degree, but you also may not completely understand it, and therefore it may not be all that it can be or you can be, for the fact that you are limiting it. And therefore it's like a bias like that. So actually the difference, so even if you were to break down the difference between oxygen and carbon dioxide in the strictest scientific terms, you would break that down to molecules, then atoms, then maybe subatomic particles, subatoms like protons, neutrons, electrons, then maybe subatomic particles finer than that, like you get to like quantum stuff like that. But what the difference between any of that is just a charge. Is it negative or positive? That's the difference between a proton and a molecule, so a proton, a neutron, and a electron are charges. I've said that I think that according to Arthur Avalon, all of life can be appreciated as attraction, repulsion, and or indifference. That's I added the part about indifference. Arthur Avalon said attraction, repulsion, but I'm saying also indifference. I just my hunch, my instinct. But then, so all the effects of life, all the flowing of life and lack thereof, and staticness of life, and the vitality, the romance of life, is the chemistry of life. What's more romantic than chemistry when chemistry is being romantic? That's attraction, repulsion, and indifference. But what is a subatomic particles that we know of? It is proton, positive, which may be repelling, because we all know that nobody likes to be around someone positive. Positive is very repelling. Negative, which is very attractive. Most people are attracted to something negative, an electron. And then a neutron is neutral. And then I don't know what. So I'm just pointing out that what you're appreciating and naming as carbon dioxide and oxygen can be finer, broken down to all the way to its molecular, atomic, then subatomic, and throughout all of that electrical standpoint is what's actually giving the effect that you're recognizing and designating with a name. But it's simply an interplay of positive, negative, and neutral. But a lot of a lot of our life and what gives expression to our life is like that also. And then so from that point, the breathing, the what makes life possible, breath at the fundamental level, can actually be a byproduct and reason to be an expression of polarity, and informs polarity, like in the actual breathing in and out, and then the pulsating of the heart in and out. And then maybe all of life is actually a similar pulsing like that. And they say that your pulse is actually the pulse of the universe, and you're actually drawing the same atmosphere as the universe that's vitalizing your pulse, so that wouldn't be wrong. But then the blood as it is existing, because it's not like, okay, here comes the oxygen, and then it gives it to the cell, and it takes the carbon dioxide and it gives it to the air, just like that right now. It's not like that. It's slow, and it's dispersed, and it's diffused, and it's gradual, and it's graceful, and it's lingering, and it's active, and it's potent, and it's latent, and it's manifest, and it's not manifest, and it's all that is what the blood is doing. Very, very sophisticated, smoother than smooth. What Osho said is that you actually don't appreciate how sophisticated and sublime your breathing is, because when you're not conscious of your breathing, there are times when it would be expedient to be conscious of your breathing, which might be why we can be conscious of breathing, and sometimes we're not conscious of breathing. But also we can be conscious of consciousness, and sometimes we're not conscious of consciousness, and sometimes we're completely unconscious. And all of that would constitute a different range of breathing, but also consciousness. And it's also necessary to be both conscious and unconscious, and have the capacity to be both and unconscious, because you need to be conscious in your waking state for activities. You need to be less conscious for sleeping, and sometimes near about unconscious for sleeping. But you have to also be somewhat conscious maybe the reason we have a subconscious is because being conscious is necessitated because we have to be aware of our environment and respond to our environment, and therefore adapt and improve and evolve and be viable as organisms. We have to be conscious, but we also have to be unconscious enough to rest. So when you're sleeping, you're resting, but you're not entirely unconscious. Because if you were completely conscious, I don't think you could come back from that to be unconscious or subconscious, and that might be what happens when people overdose themselves. Heaven forbid, as scary as that might sound. A lot of people might not think it'd be scary to be conscious, but if you were so conscious that you couldn't come back, and therefore you couldn't rest or relax, you would actually be stressed out because you'd be so conscious that you can't sustain that or come back from that. So it would be viable to be completely conscious, and therefore it may be impossible to be completely conscious and still be exist. You also couldn't be completely unconscious, because were you completely unconscious, how would you wake from that? How could somebody get enough of your attention to wake you up if you were completely unconscious? That might be similar to like a coma, and a coma might be a form of unconscious but not completely unconscious, because were you unconscious, you may have not come back. And maybe if you did achieve a coma, I don't mean to be facetious saying achieve like that, but if you did actually enter what's called a coma, maybe so much as you were completely and utterly and truly unconscious is what you cannot come back from, and so much as you were still conscious or subconscious, and therefore a little bit conscious but subconscious within your coma, that might be what you're able to come back with and of. And so that might be what was significant enough about your experience to sustain and stay out of being unconscious. And there might be some degree of consciousness, a combination of consciousness and subconsciousness, that would relegate and ration what can be dispensed with as unconsciousness and what must be sustained as consciousness, and therefore salvageable from a coma. And somebody would say, well, yeah, that sounds arbitrary that you could choose that, but actually your mind does on a certain level choose what to become, what to keep, to stay aware of, what to forget, what to conveniently forget. But we actually can't forget something that we've known. But what to avoid, what to forget, and what to remember. There's some kind of prioritization in that makes life viable, but just because it's intelligent and it's viable. So because we couldn't afford to be conscious of all of our experience at all times and still be coherent. And some of what we're conscious of, it's difficult to cope with and factor into and assimilate into what does work well for us, like is our identity and self-concept and self-esteem goes. But it can't be dispensed with because it's still a datum of fact, of, as we understand fact, of knowledge. And what is fact to us and what is fact, that might be what's being bartered, that might be what's being negotiated when you engage with the therapist. Because when you're engaging with the therapist, you already had a sensation of what is fact, what can be fact, what had to be fact, what is still fact, what was not fact. You have a sensation of that as you took that experience, and then as you went on with that experience affecting you. But when you have the input of a therapist, they may be accessing some of that through your statements, and then lending their training, which is also preconceived, and they have an investment in it, but it's still not worthless. They are, because it is based on ostensibly real observations. Then they're lending their training, but also their standing and status and appeal to you, for you to access, and you to convince yourself, or help them to convince you to convince yourself, as they convince you to convince yourself. From how much of that is believable or acceptable by your mind at different ranges may reach into and factor what you appreciate as fact of your experience, and those experiences cannot be dislodged. But what you appreciate as fact in that, it may be a little bit malleable to influence, and the actual training of the therapist, that might be a mode of influence, even as they're being technical and intellectual. It's still, that still translate into, and is an application and expression of influence. So you're paying them, or they're being paid to lend their influence to you, for you to prioritize your real experience that you can't dispense with, without dispensing with other experiences that are somehow associated to that you yet need. But so from that standpoint, we may always be some range of subconscious while we're living, because if we were completely conscious, we couldn't come down, or unconscious, we couldn't come up. Therefore, perhaps consciousness, subconsciousness, and unconsciousness are a mode of subconsciousness, a combination of consciousness and unconsciousness, and that's what makes life viable. But we do need a degree of consciousness, and or more consciousness and less consciousness at different ranges, at different moments in our environment and in our cycles of living, from day to day, month to month, week to week, year to year, uh, 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 phase to phase, and life to life. But and when I say life to life like that, I don't necessarily mean in spiritual terms of reincarnation, but just like maybe having an inheriting or progeny. But then uh, but then also our breathing, we have the capacity to breathe consciously, but also more of our breathing is subconscious, probably maybe some degree near about unconscious, but more so subconscious. Maybe you could say that you're always subconsciously breathing, but then when you're conscious of yourself breathing, your subconscious has got to such a degree that it's experienced as conscious, and it can be malleable to your perception of your environment as is expedient. But when doing so, it's more so arbitrary because it's based on your perceptions, but also your interpretation of your perceptions, and also your demands and your leniencies within your experience that would mitigate how you're choosing to breathe. But then when you go into different modes of existing, like say procreating or fighting or working or resting or socializing, that would play into subconsciously garner or invoke different modes of breathing, more by and large facilitated subconsciously, but breaching into and spilling into and sometimes being engaged by what we experience as conscious, but more so subconscious. And according to Osho, that subconscious breathing is complete, almost. So you could say that according that might be the most God. They say cleanliness is next to godliness. I would I might actually parry that, banter better that, and just say that subconscious breathing is next to God, is closer to godliness than cleaning, because they say, according to Arthur Avalon, what we call God or a Lord or a great divine immortal is viable as immortal because it wastes not. But when you're breathing subconsciously, you really waste not. You waste not. So they say like half a breath. You waste. I don't know what the smallest fraction of increment is, but I don't think you waste much more than that when you're breathing subconsciously. And even if you were to, it's still graceful because it's subconscious. So whatever you breathe, you would compensate for it as you breathe back. When you're breathing subconsciously, that's actually excellent economy. Near about, according to Arthur Avalon, he who can create breath would have to be immortal and is immortal. That is actually the designation, according to Arthur Avalon, of what, who, and how that in that something is immortal, is that it can create breath. If you create breath, you are immortal, according to Arthur Avalon. If but you but then also your breath is managed with true and what is immortal because it wastes not, according to Arthur Avalon. But when you breathe well subconsciously, that is near about the best economy in management we will reach towards or land or approach as human beings. The greatest accomplishment that we may accomplish as human beings, to my taste, is some method and mode or outcome and attendant of breathing. That's as the economy goes, managing goes, but also accomplishment, undertaking, daring, challenge, endurance. It's along the lines of breathing. So what would really impress you with that? They said that a few years ago a man ran a perfect marathon that is very difficult, and it had been thought in the past impossible to run a mile within 4 minutes. It's possible to get, like, also like a 40-yard dash sprint, to get that within 4 seconds is very difficult and nearly insurmountable for a human being as sprinting goes. But running a mile in 4 minutes is like that for jogging. But then once it had been discovered that that can be done, certain athletes achieved it. Then other athletes believed in themselves enough to do it, and it became more common to run a 4 minute mile. But apparently, a man a few years ago, an African man, ran a perfect marathon with all the 26.2, I think, miles of the marathon had been in under 4 minutes. That's a near that's a near godlike feat. If you think that is a near godlike feat. And I only say near just to be respectful. But that what you can appreciate, there would have to be some kind of facility around breathing, managing of breathing, sustaining of breathing, tolerance of breathing, sustaining of breathing, overcoming through breathing. That would have been done. You could not achieve that without some form of unique or capacity, facility, talent, or skill or economy around breathing. You could have not have done that. So that's an example of how powerful and potent breathing is, and near godlike breathing is, but also economical, efficient breathing is when it's subconscious. But also, but then the blood though, but that's as we're taking in air. But then that would be like the act. So maybe you could say that there's two forms of a lot of things. A lot of things are dual in this existence. So existence and the what is the finest definition or experience of existing? It likely would be breathing. That might be the active component, but most things that are active, according to Arthur Avalon, they have a static. So what's kinetic? That's moving, motive, motion, mobile, um, ambulatory. That ambulatory means like standing and walking. Is kinetic, but then what's static, stable, supports what's kinetic, because you can't walk unless you have something stable to walk on. You can't even fashion a lot of things that would fly through the air unless you have different forms of stability, that are facilitating that motion. So anything that moves, according to Arthur Avalon, has a static support. Motion, stability, motion, not the one without the other. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Neither, had been both simultaneously, at least as motion goes. But you could say that, so breathing might be the dynamic part, the blood itself might be the static part, and also the more dynamic. If you had to say, so what's more profound, something that runs or something that makes it possible to run? Sometimes you think about, like, you watch like vehicles on the highway, and you think about how awesome this big old truck is that went down the highway. 80,000 pounds of twisted steel and probably useless consumer products. Now I'm actually, we shouldn't bite the hand, and we all need different products. So that was actually that was a little bit coy or like smug to make that reference. I was just trying to be funny with that. But you have a semi truck go by like that, and then 1, 2, 10, 20, 100, 1,000 of them in a day past that point in the highway. But then all kinds of SUVs, trucks, motorcycle, whatnot, all kinds of stuff flying down the highway. It's impressive when that thing goes by. You didn't think how impressive it was that the ground could support that. The ground is supporting all these cars going at any speed they choose, any direction they go. Yeah, you're ready to go that way. I'm ready to go this much that way. Support you. As much as you see stuff moving on the highway, on a deep, if you want to think of a deep thought, a really deep thought, for every action there's a equal and opposite reaction. So if a car is going down the highway like that, you can see the car going like that, but there would have to be an equal and opposite reaction. So that dynamic and speed and direct of motion is taking place simultaneously. You see the motorcycle. So there's a leader and a follower. There's the top and the bottom, in life. In dancing, in any dance, there's a leader and a follower. You see the motorcycle move. That might actually be the follower. The leader would be the ground, and you actually can't see that motion of the motorcycle dissipated into the ground. But as soon as you saw the motorcycle go that far in a straight line at 80 miles an hour, some form of energy went that far backward in a straight line at 80 miles an hour, at least, if not in all directions at the same time, simultaneously. You didn't perceive that. That's actually a deep thought, because that's saying that a lot of motion, a lot of existing, that is, we're not seeing it, even though it's existing enough for, because it would have to exist for the motorcycle to move straight forward. If we appreciate Newtonian physics, that for each action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when they say that you can't see like a spirit or a deity. Now spirit, that's more so air, that actually might be less profound because it's active and dynamic like that. But something like a deity, something that's a living potent force capable of compelling and therefore impelling, compelling and impelling, that's means causing, but therefore also meeting. Because if you can cause something to do this, you can also meet it there. So if something can cause any form of activity, any form of phenomenon, like something like a deity, it can also meet any form of activity, like a, if it can cause it, but you don't see it. So we see all kinds of things existing, flying, this and that, airships, rockets, cars, people, planets. We see that moving, but we don't see what's putting it into motion. And what's putting it into motion maybe something like what you're calling a deity or whatnot. Completely invisible wouldn't be the right word, because it's still, that still implies a form. A form is like a non-visible form, but this is beyond form. But it's real and vital and reciprocal and congruent to whatever is taking form, but it's yet formless and more of moving for not being seen moving, and moving as much while not being seen, but not necessarily having a corporal, that means like embodied, a constituent or like a reference or frame, but it's just complete. It's just pure, pure. So they say all energy is kinetic and potential, but you don't think about how dynamic but also existential potential is. So when the motorcycle goes as or a vehicle goes as kinetic energy, you don't see the potential energy that it put into the ground. And that potential energy, it might also be kinetic, as in moving away from where the motorcycle or the vehicle is moving, but it also might be static, but also still as dynamic and potentially mobile as mobile. So when that motorcycle goes like that at 80 miles, or that semi goes like that at 80 miles an hour, is that not also sending energy potentially as both potential or also kinetic energy to all points of the entire Earth apparatus, theoretically, at once on some level? So we can appreciate something as fine as an atom or subatomic particle. Can there not be a finer constituent in the ultimate sense, if all things exist on a range, and we ourselves as human beings are on a range, including our perceptual apparatus, including that's been improved upon by scientific means and implements and appendages and bolstering? Is there not yet even finer degrees of matter, existence, energy, and potential energy, such that any action that may be born upon the earth could potentially affect all points of the earth, if not the universe? That's sophisticated and sublime motion beyond what we can see and appreciate generally intellectually. And I wanted to offer that standpoint with this thought, but also that just to say that for all the things that we see that are active kinetic, there's a equal, if not greater, static component. And I would say likely static would be greater, since it makes possible the kinetic. You can have kinetic, you can have static maybe without necessarily kinetic. I haven't reasoned that out. I don't know if anything that is now static had to at one point be kinetic, or something had to be kinetic to facilitate something being static. That could be, but it still would seem that static is greater, simply because so much of kinetic, you can have so much kinetic activity like on a highway, but you actually don't see the static, but the static is substantiating and validating and making possible the kinetic activity. But then the blood might be like that also, where the active, it would be the greatest thing we can do, and the greatest representation, or the greatest constituent and unit of existence, experience of existence, would be breathing, but also blood. Because what is there of life? What is the deepest description of life? The breath. But what does the breath do? It informs the blood. So it makes the blood possible, and the blood makes life possible. So the blood might be the also, that might actually be the same thing. It might be different. It actually might be a different range of thickness of the same thing, but also direction of motion, or mode of motion would be, because they say that water, solid, and liquid, it can be the same thing, and it transmutes in terms of heat, hot and cold, but actually a better description of hot and cold is energy. So the blood might actually be in fact the air at a different range or depth of energy, a different frequency and mode of energy might actually be the blood. But then the blood, I think that the blood is not just simply conveying nutrition directly. Also, it may be sustaining nutrition and then lingering and dispersing and managing and hoarding and releasing and uh what's the word I'm looking for? It may be mitigating the energy, but not necessarily all at once, and very as sophisticated and sublime and economical, near about to the point of rivaling or approaching what it means to be immortal is the body's economy with breath when healthy. The blood might be that and more in how economical it is and smooth it is and rationing it is, but also dynamic it is. So if you think about all that has ever been done in of motion that has been either conceived, created, or acted out or understood by human beings is a function of breathing, because there's no existence of a human being without breath. So from that standpoint, all that you have said and seen that is awesome, and Michael Jordan dunking from the free throw, um, a nuclear bomb, um, uh, uh, racehorses, just or like rocket ships, F-22 planes flying, all that was possible from breathing and is an expression, and it actually is it's an expression and a mode and an outcome of breathing, because none of that would be done without breathing and different people managing their breath well to do that, like the skill, but then also the just the fact that you can survive long enough, like through a night or through a day or through a lifetime, to later experience and achieve and do something. The subconscious breathing that you were doing your whole life made that possible by and large. But then so all you've ever seen, all that you got to see and have ever seen have actually been your own breath, because you wouldn't have got to perceive it, and that you could perceive it and that other people could do it was from the breath. So all you've ever seen that's cool, that's impressive, that's mind blowing had been breath. But then finer, that might be active, kinetic, that was possible and reciprocal, and that was kinetic, but what was potential with the that potence potential, where the potence had come for all that you have seen, done, felt, known, understood, hoped, or reasoned is cool, had been the blood deeper than that. So as of whatever the most sophisticated thing you ever saw was, like maybe you saw a fly going in the room, like, sometimes if you appreciate the way flies move, how quick they can adjust, it's actually kind of beautiful and profound to think that there would have to be something conscious but also small to actually manipulate its wings that fast and intelligently to fly like that and maneuver itself like that. That's deep. But on some level, that fly couldn't have done that without either breathing itself or the oxygen or the air that 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 vitalizes it, or the things that it gets its support from. The so from that standpoint, it's some form of breathing, because the plants also breathe. And then also that fly may have blood, or the different things it would consume would have blood. So the blood is actually more fundamental and therefore dynamic than even a fly moving around crazy like that, as fast but also intelligent as that would be, is the blood. So potentially, even though the blood would seem to be what I was going with, like talking about perhaps some of motion, and the greater of motion, the more dynamic of motion actually being imperceptible and near about static, but also dynamic for being static and kinetic while being static, as in the earth. Our blood might be similar, where it's actually as dynamic as the most dynamic thing you've ever seen and could have ever seen, because it's possible, because that you could see that, and that it could be done because you have blood in that, what you perceive had blood, or the ability to do what it does because of something with blood. Your blood may actually be as mobile and dynamic and really profound as it's existing, while you can't perceive that it's doing that. So sometimes, like you sometimes think about when your blood is compromised, right? Like when say you have an intoxicant, especially like that actually might be a lot of what intoxicants are doing is that it's not just that the intoxicant is messing with your brain matter, the material of your brain. The intoxicant is affecting your blood. Your blood may be doing more of moving than you think, and your thoughts might actually be a form of motion. It's strange to think. A lot of people they'd appreciate the thoughts as like chemicals, but chemicals are actually, if you break a chemical all the way down, it's different forms of motion of subatomic particles, or even like something so fine we can't put it in physical terms, but it still can be appreciated as motion. um Damn, I completely lost my train of thought. um but a thought, I think one of the reasons they can't isolate thought is because they don't have enough, they're not open-minded or aware or profound enough to think that the thought might actually be motion. And so you act, but so as so like when this, so okay, how does this look? Hey you, get out of here. You could almost appreciate that Cracker had been conscious just by the way it was moving. As but now it did all that, right? But where the hell did that go? It's it it's just a cracker now. Now, if you saw it do that crazy stuff, it still looks like it has some of its personality, but it's not moving that same way and therefore not existing that same way. So what that thought had been, what that the air, the manner, the personality the aesthetic that Cracker had when it was moving like that, it actually doesn't exist anymore as I'm holding like that. But actually, since all things are cause and effect, and you can't get past anything that you did in terms of cause and effect, this Cracker, as it's not moving anymore, it's still possessed on some level of the inertia of that different motion that it had. And that might be why thoughts are thought, then they don't exist, and they can't be accounted for, and then now we can potentially recall them, and because the inertia of that thought is still there, but it had just been a motion, and the dynamic of that motion, the frame of that motion, the aesthetic of that motion, it gave the sensation and experience of a thought. But our blood might be like that, where our blood is really whatever is real of us, that is our breath. It might, and so things exist on a grade, the breath in the form of air, but the breath in the form of water or fluid, that might be the dynamic, is it's, or the support at least, and therefore maybe more dynamic, or at least as dynamic but differently. It's moving more probably, but more probably way more sophisticated. And then like sometimes they'd say that it's interesting when they watch some subatomic particles, because sometimes the subatomic particle, so I was saying that thoughts might be motion like that, right? But still this motion is more so arbitrary, because that cracker seemed to exist the whole time, or be in one place, then in another, then in another. Now it's interesting that when you watch something frame for frame, like on a screen, you actually don't see anything of motion when I do this. You see rapid frames that give this sensation of motion, but you would still appreciate that it had actually moved when it was in my hand, but not on the screen. But you actually might say that even when I move it like this, there had actually been really no motion linear. It might have actually been the same jumping as a frame would do. So it actually might be a frame in real life, and a frame when it's conveyed over these digital apparatus that capture that refashion and replicate graphics of light, graphs of light. But actually it might be as much of a frame as I'm going like this, if you take it in the quantum level, where it might be like jumping. So they say that what confounds scientists is that right now something's here, and then it's here. They would say in chemistry that that'd be like a wavelength, so like a valence, like I think it's like a valence. So like an atom, it has uh, electrons, protons, and neutrons, but they exist at very specific ranges, because that's where they will tolerate one another. But then they move sometimes, and when they shift forcefully and rapidly and instantly. and they will not and they don't they will not, it's like a they will not they will they what's the word they uncompromisingly is what it does when it jumps like that. So when you hear something like, we know tough guys and stuff like that, but nothing sounds or looks tough next to some, like some rounds going off, some gunfire. That stuff means business, hella serious. I can't like I can't. So if you hear a gunshot, like a large enough caliber, but even a small caliber, you hear a gunshot, pop, that means serious. That means go. But it's also instant. But also, perhaps when that gunshot, when that round went off, the chemical reaction that is giving that sensation of sound, that reverberation and vibration of sound, the actual chemical reaction when it took place, when it was primed, but also when it engaged and took place, it may not have actually moved. So the gunpowder, it expands, right? But and then so the firing pin strikes the back of the bullet. That creates a spark. That spark ignites the gunpowder. But it might, so you would think of that in terms of fire, is that it lit it up and then it got hot and then it did that. But what it might have done is that the gunpowder was very unstable, by and large unstable. Like, I don't know if you wouldn't necessarily call that flammable, but it's very unstable. It's primed, it's tense, it's uh and then so that much friction, that because really the fire, the spark is actually just friction, and it looks like it affects light to look like fire, but it's actually just friction. I think fire itself is actually friction. So in the deepest sense, what is fire? Like, a lot of people, you might not actually be able to express what is fire, because you would say like, well, fire is hot, it's yellow, but what is it? Can you touch it? Yeah, it'll burn your ass if you touch it, but can you actually touch fire if it didn't burn you? You may not be able to, because it may actually be friction. But not only is it friction, but it may be like residual friction. So when I was saying like, when something may move on the earth, something, one thing, that if something happens now, it happened forever, because we're actually existing at all points of existence. If you take away a reference, we're actually at all points of physical but also temporal existence. If we're ever anywhere at all, then we're always all places at all. But the and that actually may lend itself into a discussion of deja vu, which I had with a family member recently. But um the and I what I said to them, and as I said in other videos, I think all of life may actually be deja vu, um because it doesn't necessarily have to go linear or be once and over. But when you actually have a sensation of deja vu, a lot of times it's unsettling, and that might be because you may be about to, approaching, or within some actual divergence of what had been deja vu before you got to the experience of deja vu. But I think that the when the when so the fire, the fact that there can be fire is a function of friction, and comes from friction. But I think that some of, as fires is existing, you could say that it creates a sensation of light. What you see as fire is the effect of fire, but it's not fire. But in the deeper sense, fire is almost like a residual friction, where it's friction, but it's not occurring at the same time as what caused the friction. So you strike a match, that strike is back there 5 minutes ago, like as a candle would go 5 minutes ago, an hour ago, 10 hours ago, several days ago. As a forest fire would go, it might be a few weeks ago. So someone strikes a match to start a forest fire, and now it's on for days and weeks and a month. That actual fire, as it ravages, yes, it did draw fuel, but actually you could say that it's still a function. It's a function. It's not necessarily the actual action of its striking anymore. Although on the deepest level, it may still be that. It's a function of that striking, of that friction. So you could say maybe fire is a function of friction, but it's still at the same time friction as a function, but it's like a residual and it's not limited in time to the point when the friction occurred. And so from that standpoint, it may be like a residual or even a more dynamic form of friction. And that's why we can't appreciate it. You might even say it's otherworldly, because as we understand the physical earth in length, width, and height and temporal time, that is linear progression of time, based on, actually it's funny, based on the cycles of the planets, which are not linear, but we appreciate time as linear. Or even the rotation of the earth in the sun is not linear, but we appreciate our experience of one another and experiencing life with reference to that cyclical motion as though it will, or linear progression. That may be redundant. It actually may be accurate in that one thing creates the opposite. So maybe a circular motion creates a linear effect, but still, it may confound what we would call natural, because the fire is yet friction, because it came from friction and it's still friction, but it is somehow beyond and more dynamic than the actual, and different, and it behaves in a different range and manner of motion than the actual friction which incited its cause. But so so the friction would be the cause, but fire is both the effect and the cause of itself, because it'll sustain itself. So that might be, most things are, we appreciate most things as cause and effect, and we don't appreciate how and where in that cause is part of effect, and effect is cause, and an effect is in the cause, and a cause is in the effect. But fire, it's more prominent, and that might be why we're impressed with fire. But it's actually existing both as a cause and as an effect at once. And maybe that's why it's somewhat transcendent, because sometimes if you just look at a flame, like some people could be arguing, like people are arguing, they're saying bad things about me, and then I strike up a match and I just start staring at it like that. That might look crazy, or it might look transcendent. I'm looking at something cooler, not necessarily cooler, but I'm looking at something doper and more interesting than you guys running your mouth about me, but also somewhat transcendent, because it's different than you guys running your mouth about me, or any subject you would have to talk about me with you running your mouth about me, other than fire, because most things you would have to talk about me are some example of cause and effect with some form of latency or like delay between that. But the fire is both cause and effect at once, so it may be different than anything or any what you would call an element existing. And it's interesting, because if you think all the elements, like earth, I think especially earth and water, but then also wind, can cause friction, but fire, but like, and have like a, maybe not as much. So earth, wind, and air have a physical, corporal, that means like physical component that you can objectively touch and respond, and it can be touched by. But fire does not have a physical, corporal existence. It has an effect, but it doesn't have like an actual existence that you can that you can manage or manipulate, and things can be manipulated with it as a physical property, other than its force and the direction of its force. But as a stable property, as having stability, it's actually beyond that range of existing. So you could say that actually earth, wind, and fire are the same thing and the same nothing, but it's just simply energy, but it's different modes and manner, modes and directions and rates of energy. Earth, wind, and fire may be different rates of the same thing. So it may actually be one, and even ether is another substance that people don't always talk about, maybe as a part of and finer and running through all those is ether. But still, it could just be appreciated as energy, and the actual eccentricities and dynamics and ranges of energy is what would give the sensation of those properties, or those elements. And then but so you could say there's actually only one element, and the word one would be redundant when you're talking about that much of unity and dynamicism is what existence is actually really just one fine energy. What is that element is just cause. What has caused this existence is the element that there is, and all things are some range of an effect of that. But for fire, it would seem to be cause and effect at once, as our understanding of both like maybe linear and cyclical and ultimate time is that a fire it may be fire may be all maybe cause and effect at once, and therefore all points of what we would consider linear time, that is the experience of a sensation of space and time, which are also just the elements, and which I'm saying may be element, which may be cause. So fire is cause and effect, but also cause, and and transcendent of what we would call natural. But all I meant to say is that our blood may be as dynamic as the craziest thing you could think, also existing at once and simultaneously. But and so from that range, sometimes when you compromise the blood differently, it gives a different sensation of existing and also thought. But that might be why some of what the intoxicating property of different so what are we doing all day long? We're breathing all day long, but we're breathing based on our nature. So if I'm always pissed off all the time, I'm going to be breathing differently than someone who's always calm all the time. And then also I'm going to be in the habit of being pissed off, so I'm going to be pissed off more and breathe like I'm pissed off more. Or if I'm calm, I'm going to be calm more and breathe like I'm calm more, and then therefore breathe and be calm more, or get pissed and get pissed off and breathe like I'm pissed off more, if that had been the habit. But so, and then also the manner of breathing affects the state of the blood, therefore the composition and the inclination of the being that is sustained by the blood, and it's then later its expression and behavior and proclivities that may actually be the genus, the type of being. So all things are related yet different. What's different about us? Our temperament. But how do we get our temperament? Our choices. But how do we get our choices? Our habits. But how do we get our habits? Our choices. So all things actually might just be a form of character, mitigated by choice, but also reinforced by choice, and somewhat malleable, capable of change, but also locked in and from change by means of habit. And that actually might be what evolution is. Evolution is both the demand and the challenge and the necessity to both remain similar and change as is expedient. But what's demanded of and unavoidable is choice and action, and therefore habit, and the redoubling of that is unavoidable. But how that amounts to other people's and other beings in beings in iterations, similar choices with similar circumstances and rigors, is what amounts to what will be viable. So when people say that, oh yeah, that's popular for the sake of popular, I did this and that, but if you did it over here, it might take off and more people would like it. Yeah, something's called an ad populum argument, when you argue because other people, everybody says that this is the coolest thing. Nobody does that. That might be bigger than it sounds, where it's actually whatever everyone does or works for everyone might actually be what evolution is. What is evolution? Evolution is what works for everybody, or that is the majority, like majority rules, or whatever the trends are is what works. But you could say that, so things are constantly breathing all the time. Humans, plants, and animals are breathing. Maybe bacteria, virus, and minerals and metals, but that's like a deeper range than I can express, or just with the level of reasoning and background that I'm employing with this. But but things are always breathing, people, animals, and plants. But we have prerogative to act in different. You could say that maybe plants actually do act, but you couldn't perceive, just like you couldn't perceive some of the dynamic range of potential and also kinetic energy within something stable like the earth, or profound like the earth. You may not actually be able to appreciate how plants may be existing, that is vibrating in a great sense, and also communing in a great sense, that you would go past the range of your awareness, or both in terms of the limitations of your sensation of space, that is objects in their depth, elements constituted as constituent elements that constitute objects at different range relative to sense of self and other, but then also the interplay of that and the cycle of that and the change of that would give sensation of temporal reality, that is time. um, all that is can be reasoned somewhat arbitrary and limited, even as we can make coherent thought and replication and understanding of our reality in our mind. A lot of it can be appreciated as somewhat redundant and or at least limited and relative. And so from that standpoint, we may actually be perceiving how plants, but also animals and insects are truly existing, but also communing. So you could say that plants, they actually do act on a certain level. Even if you, so something happens, you can act, you can act, react, or do nothing, but all of them are a form of action. So actually, plants not acting is a form of action, and they may actually have habits of doing that. But then also that would inform the way that they breathe. That is like in terms of photosynthesis, would give their character. And these plants are reciprocal and engaged and exactly correspond and benefit and also harm our body exactly, neatly, reciprocal, as though they were intended. So maybe these plants are beings that are breathing as we are breathing. And what is significant in coming to us coming together is one, both our nature, that's a function of our breathing, and our thoughts, our mind, will, and emotion that is informed by our breathing, but also informed by our choices and habits, which also inform our breathing and inform our nature. And that maybe is true with animals, people, which are animals that move, and plants, which may be animals that don't move. Um, they exactly correspond because they're doing the same thing always, that is breathing, and are replications of different habits and modes over eons of breathing one way or a similar way, that the type of being engaging and consuming the plant and the plant. But some of what may be profound about plants affecting our consciousness is that the plants are charged by the fact that they're breathing the polarized air and taking in the polarized water on the polarized earth, and maybe other ranges of existence and energy that are also polarized but that we may not perceive or be aware of. And therefore they are unique, but also very charged in some way. The word charge, we may be too simple-minded to appreciate how that charge would truly exist without a frame of reference of time, both for a plant existing in our present iteration of existence and its lineage of eons coming into itself, which are still itself, and how ancient a plant can be appreciated as. That may affect on a deep level the way that vibration, that polarity, which is expressed and is actually vibration, can affect the blood of a human being, which is also vibrating in very dynamic and profound and potential ways that are that cannot be appreciated generally without arbitrary references of temporal existence of space and time, linear space and time as we know, limited space and time as we know, both as we are existing in this iteration and other iterations that would be appreciated as our ancestors. That dynamic range that may be taking place may be interacting with the plant and giving us a perception of, it's giving us an actual motion. So when the plant is polarized this way, but that is actually existing, that is vibrating this way, so are we in our body, our flesh, and our, but also our, specifically our blood, which none of our flesh is viable without the blood. That combination may make us as an existence, which are our blood, this plant, and then whatever other range of us we can perceive and understand, and also not. We're now existing differently, and then therefore moving differently, therefore having perceptions of thoughts differently based on that motion. And there could be almost no end to how creative that could be. But sometimes like when alcohol would make a room spin for you. So now, and I think that some of what actually makes us have, so I think that if you appreciate what they say chemicals like electrons and so forth are doing, the way that they really exist as it's appreciated by scientists, It's anything but stable. It's subtle, subtler than subtle, but anything but stable is what existence is. That's the existence without, but you actually can't perceive something without being it, because actually, as I'm looking at something, that thing is not actually inside of me, but I'm taking in a range of perception and then reconstituting it and representing it to myself, almost like virtual reality inside of my mind, which I don't say that I completely articulate what a mind is. But what I'm calling my mind, as I appreciate it, is within, and as I'm perceiving something, as I'm perceiving it without, there would have to be some overlap and actually sameness within. So you actually may see what you are the same as. Your mind is the same as what you're perceiving, which is why you can perceive it. And if it were different, you couldn't perceive it because you couldn't be it, therefore experience it, therefore perceive it, even though you think that it's outside of you. But then, uh, um, but what we appreciate as understand as without, which may be as much within, but no different for being without and also within, is that it's vibrating way more sophisticated than we could ever appreciate with the last of our short-term memory, which it actually requires memory to look at something, because the rate at which you see something moving is actually your memory. That's actually a combination. So you just saw my hand go like that, right? The sensation of motion was your short-term memory, but the fact that you are cognizant that I did move my hand like that 10, 15, 20 seconds, a minute ago, that's your more so of your long-term memory. And then the longer I go on talking like this, your long-term memory is going to dissipate, and you will soon not be cognizant that I had done that first consciously, then unconsciously. But if I do it again, both me doing so, my hand and the cracker have the same inertia and are connected to the same inertia that I did at the same time, which you have felt that inertia and are that inertia, which would make it familiar to you. But also, you still have the inertia of vibrating and corresponding to what you saw. And so when you see it again, you recognize, you remember, recall that I did that again, not only because I'm doing it again, but because you're vibrating like that again, that is now perceiving it again, and you have done so before, and you are on some level recognizing and familiar that you have done so before, on some degree, on the range of consciousness, subconsciousness, and maybe a little bit of unconsciousness. Um, but I think that uh, your blood may, as profound and dynamic as what is about you and around you may be vibrating, your blood may also be doing that. So what I wanted to say, where I was going with this, is that sometimes I think that your blood, it's moving around and it's so dynamic that it allows you to have a stable perception of your environment, and therefore perception of yourself, such that you can engage your will and further be alive and move. And so, but if a person were to bleed out, or so, if your blood was affected, your sensation of your environment would be first interesting, fun, cool, then maybe incoherent and scary and unmanageable, such that you may not be able to cope and maintain homeostasis, which requires consciousness. That's also why I wanted to say that we can't be completely unconscious or conscious utterly, because we must achieve and maintain homeostasis, which requires our mind and a degree of consciousness, but a lot more probably subconscious. So were we to lose, we can maybe do without consciousness to a degree, but were we to lose subconscious utterly and therefore become unconscious, unconscious may be the same of death as death if it is truly unconscious. And whatsoever you can actually be unconscious and therefore come back to subconscious and conscious may be what is possible to be transcended in what is called death. If you take away, if just in terms of consciousness, if you take away what physical physical support and standpoint you have to have as a human mortal being, we understand ourselves to be conscious. If you were to, if you can be completely unconscious and then conscious again, perhaps you can completely lose your mind, that is, cease to exist as a mental being, and then, or even as a corporal physical being, as you are still unconscious, whether it's still corporal or not, and then come back to ever being conscious again. That might be what is possible of transcending and going beyond, if you take away whatever the physical body facilitates in terms of consciousness. If you adjust for that and just take the fact that you can potentially be completely unconscious, like black out with liquor or whatnot, and then at some point again be conscious. However, that is possible if you factor for the if you adjust for the fact that some of that has a physical component to it, or facility basis is our being organic beings, physical beings. That might be what's possible about dying and coming back from death, just being completely unconscious goes. But so I think that we have to whatever for you to perceive something, you have to actually be what you are. Like sometimes like you don't think about that. Like, so how do you look at something from short range to long range? You think like your pupils dilate. Look, let me squint. Like, oh, I gotta see that range. You might actually be changing the vibration of your eyes when you squint like that, or when you dilate to where. So I'm looking at this cracker. It's right in front of my face. That something, the wall 7-8 feet back, as far as light goes, as far as light bouncing off of and refracting, I think is the word, from the cracker to the cornea of my eyes, or from that wall to the cornea of my eyes, you could appreciate that in terms of the speed of light. Because if light can go like 300,000 miles a second around the earth, that's really almost nothing of distance between the cracker and the wall. But when the only thing that you could say would be objective different between them would be just the perspective would be different. But if we're perceiving along the lines of light at that rate of force and speed as light is, and we must be something of if we can perceive light. It's interesting that we can perceive light completely naturally. People would say like the naked eye, but actually the natural eye. But it's actually profound that your body exactly corresponds with light and can perceive light without adding anything to yourself before you get along to having to wear glasses. But at the range and the speed of light, what's 5 feet or 10 feet doesn't actually have almost any meaning. And also the space, the actual size of existence, that amount of space doesn't have almost any meaning. So you're more so actually what does have meaning would be dimensions. So that's actually maybe an example of what a dimension is that not necessarily in terms of length, width, and height, but somehow, and so maybe you'd say that the discrepancy in length, width, and height from my vantage point gives a sensation of perception, but that's still quite arbitrary and redundant and almost like negligible in the ultimate sense of what existence is, but also what light is, as we're perceiving along the lines of light, and therefore maybe are something of light ourselves. But what so that but the difference might be it's actually a different dimension. So when you're changing you're squinting your eyes like that, you're accessing a different dimension. That, yeah, it's only 7 feet away, but that's actually just a different dimension. You would say no, it's not a different dimension. You're sounding like conspiracy saying dimension. It's only 7 feet, but as light goes and as existence goes, as broad as what we're calling existence is, or what we're reaching for with the word existence. The word what may be redundant because that it implies that it can be capped or understood, but you may not likely understand something like that. But what's more significant in the greatest sense ultimately than the depth or the perspective, since it seems significant, that seems like it's far away. That's only 7 feet away, but it seems like it's far away from my vantage point. But as reality is, and I don't mean to be arbitrary with reality as though there's one or a definition of it, but as what we call a unit, as the local planets go, that's so negligible, that range. But what would be just more significant, a better way to say is that it's a different dimension. It's a different dimension that is depth. Another word for dimension is actually depth. Depth and dimension. It's another depth that is dimension, that is like frequency. And so when I'm squinting my eyes like that, it comes in closer because I'm somewhat accessing that frequency through light as my eyes can do so. So my eyes, so the actual the as the speed of light goes, that wall 7 feet away is as close as I'm squinting and as I'm not. But it as the range of the planets go, it is soon may as well be in my as close to me as the cracker is. But when I squint my eyes, I'm actually somehow accessing that depth, and it appears to come in closer. But I may have actually went into another depth by appreciating light differently. So light is bringing both the cracker is as near to me when I'm looking at it and accessing it visually as the range of the wall is, in the ultimate sense, as the speed of light goes, as the speed of light facilitates. But when I squint my eyes, not just physically squinting my eyes, but actually changing my mind, because they say that, like, according to Osho, vision does not take place in your eyes, and when someone goes blind, it's not necessarily a problem in the eyeball itself. Vision is a more sublime function and faculty of the mind that employs the eyes to access perception, but is beyond the eyes and the eyes at once, and what is being perceived at once is the actual method and mode and facility and agency and uh, emanation of or emanation maybe of vision. It's a deeper faculty beyond what you appreciate as the eyeball. And if someone has a problem with vision, it doesn't necessarily mean they have a problem with their eyeball, according to Osho. And so we think of more so of vision as our eyes, but it's actually a deeper, subtler faculty and part of our mind that's actually visualizing, that is replicating what we're perceiving as ourselves, so as we can understand and experience it, because we actually can't experience anything but ourselves. So when people say selfish is not entirely bad, and that's actually might be what's beautiful about love, is that you've appreciated someone so much that you can be selfish about them, and you recognize that they have been you. That might be why you can't get over people, is because they had actually been you, and you can't get over yourself. As great as we are, we can't get over ourselves. So, but when you actually visually perceive something, whether it be this close in front of you or 7 feet, the only difference in the ultimate sense, as depth goes, if you're not being negligible, like as far as how short of a range that is within reference to the planets, and also the light, which is, so you would say that, man, you're talking about planets, like, what are you talking about planets? But actually, light potentially could travel from where I'm at to any one of the near planets in a very short duration of what was called linear time, not the least of which from what I'm holding my hand to a wall. So what's significant about me either visually perceiving what's in front of my face, or the wall what's in front of my face as though it's close, or the wall as though it's perceptible or vivid, would be actually me squinting, changing my visual apparatus, but more so engaging a different depth that's available through light with my mind, by squinting my eyes, but also having the intention to squint my eyes. So what came first? The accessing of another dimension and range of depth with our mind, by sending a signal, by accessing the eyes, or by accessing the light which changed the eyes. It can be reason which you can wonder which came first. Did you accessing a different range of dimension in your mind cause your eyes to move, or did causing your eyes allow you to access a different range of dimension, that is depth, that is dimension, that is available through the light that's proliferating? It's interesting. So but I think that for us to, but just that we could perceive something and it would seem stable or coherent, but also that we could have a sense of self that's coherent. I think it's the blood is as dynamic as anything that we're perceiving, and what we're perceiving is dynamic if you appreciate it as the chemists do. That it's actually moving a lot and sophisticatedly, but also not exactly straight. So like when I was talking about the gunpowder and the gunpowder, when it's like this and then it expands like that, and it expands such as to eject something, it didn't actually stretch out like that in the quantum sense. It was here and now it's here. There had been no change, there had been no traveling. It was here and then here, because actually the energy change, the tolerance changed. So that the what's called the subatomic particles, they're together, but they're not happy to be together. Then friction is introduced, and now they let it all out, but they actually didn't go that far away. They're just here now because the energy changed. So the actual when the firing rod struck the pin, it didn't actually just like spread fire and then the fire made it go big and expand. And even if the fire is that had actually been friction, it doesn't have like a physical uh, constituent. So, but what happened is that action of the priming, it changed the energy. The energy changed the reality because the reality didn't get the energy wasn't changing the reality. It changed the reality. So it's here, not coming up here. It's here now. It's here. So, and from that standpoint, if someone was getting blasted like that, heaven forbid, it's not that there was like a slow process of you getting blasted. There was energy, and now you're blasted. And so, if you were ever blasted, you were always blasted. So that's actually deep in that you had actually, for intensive persons, always been blasted. And that's kind of like a little bit like a discussion of fatalism, which is like, did what happened have to happen, and did it happen more than once, and is it always happening, and is it always gonna happen, or does it sometimes change? And when it does change, or it's being experienced consciously as having been experienced before, is it yet changing, or is it the same and being recognized as the same? So is it a warning? Is it an alteration? Or is it if you really did if I really experienced this before and had really experienced it before exactly as I've been experiencing before, and I'm now again experiencing it and was going to experience it again the second time, would I even be conscious of that? But if I do become conscious of that, would that not mean that there was a discrepancy or potential to change it, perhaps, especially like with the foreboding feeling of deja vu? So that's just like some food for thought. But I was just thinking that the blood is like that, like it may be like that with the like with quantum material, which the blood is composed of what's called quantum particles. Particle might be redundant because it's like a little bit materialistic to think that things are separated, because things are more unified than can be appreciated, but also more dynamic. So particles, it's a little bit arbitrary to me. It's like anthropomorphic man-made concept to say particles. It's not limited to what you would call one, but it's not necessarily greater than what you would call one anything, or different anything than one than anything else. But it may just be energy. It'd be maybe the only thing that's real, and it doesn't necessarily have any what we call physical or divisible essence. It can be finer than fine and broader than broad and as normal as normal. And the fundamental element, energy. Um, but an element and energy sound decided for as though it's defined, and it may still be defining itself. What we're reaching for, that what is a cause. But the blood may be dynamic like that, and also capricious like that, and also in more than one place at like that, and one place and both places and none and both and one. That might be what the blood is, and such that it's as dynamic as what we're perceiving, but also more dynamic than what we're perceiving, because we can respond to what we're perceiving, and normally what we appreciate as we're perceiving can't respond to us. So the blood and what we're perceiving, we can perceive because we have blood. So the blood may be more dynamic. But if the blood were intoxicated, like say alcohol, now the room starts to spin. So when the room starts to spin under alcohol, is the room spinning? So most people say that if you see something that's not in front of you, you're delusional at that point. But if you're but if you are under the but you are seeing something. If like anyone who has seen the room spin under alcohol, the room really did look like it was spinning. And most people that would see you seeing the room spinning, they wouldn't argue that you're seeing the room spinning, but they would argue that you think that it's real, that the room is spinning. So part of what might be getting people feeling jacked up and drunk and throwing up is not necessarily that the room is spinning, but that the room is spinning, but you've been taught to think that you're not spinning while the room is spinning. That might really be what's having the room spinning, that you can't handle. But if you appreciate that you are what you're perceiving, and you may be spinning as much as what the room is spinning, especially because you've intoxicated your blood. So you've intoxicated your blood. Now you exist differently. Now what you would perceive exists differently, and it's been reasoned in quantum studies that actually perceiving something changes something. Like when people, scientists, perceive different and set up different experiments, the outcomes are different because they're changing what they're perceiving by perceiving it. That's appreciated. But a lot of people wouldn't perceive that the room is actually spinning while you're seeing the room spinning while your blood has been affected by alcohol. And just because that's not other person's experience, that might actually be other people's experience, but their blood and the room is spinning differently for them, with their blood spinning differently because they're not intoxicated. So it seems coherent to them and manageable to them, but it may be existing as crazy and crazier for them being sober as you being drunk, and them being more crazier for them because they're more subtle and dynamic and healthy being drunk than you under alcohol. But they don't have that experience of it because it's perfectly calibrated when the blood is healthy. But then when so what I mean to say is that I think that our blood may be moving in all times, in all ways, and as is expedient, as it's existing. And part of why, like, sometimes I think, but then it may move differently when you have different purposes and intentions. So like when you get turned on, it's not necessarily just that now your body's pumping blood differently, so you're getting turned on. The blood is actually also moving differently, so you're getting turned on, which is also making the heart pump differently, so you're getting turned on. But it's not only that the heart is pumping more, but that the blood is moving differently, and then the heart is responding to the blood. And then so getting turned on is not just in more blood flow, it's in different blood flow, as is any other undertaking that we go, that is usually can be appreciated in terms of, like, when I was visited at a medical place and they were doing all these tests on me, and also so one was talking to me and one was testing me. As the one that was testing me, as the one that was talking to me got done talking to me, and the one that was testing me started reporting what he had found, I didn't know that whole time I was talking he was doing very sophisticated tests on me, or that his blood is this and that, this over that, that is systole over diastole. He had perceived the actual number of that, the actual charge of that, the actual polarity of the systole and diastole, the heart pressure. But then also he had checked the rate of the heart rate, how many per minute. So as I'm having a certain experience, but also healthy, um, that is constituted a certain range or frequency of heart pulse, and also polarity as systole and diastole go. If there had been something in the health that was profound about that, so part of my behavior in talking with them, how I feel around them, how I'm behaving, it's affecting some of those metrics, like the pulse and the blood pressure. Had I been running, my pulse and my blood pressure would be different. Had I been running my mouth, my pulse and my blood pressure would be different. Had I been thinking thoughts, my pulse and my blood pressure would be different. That may also be for different undertakings we do: getting pissed off, being focused, being creative, being happy, being sad, being turned on, being turned off. That all might be, you could appreciate that on the outward metrics as the heart rate and the blood pressure, and how that would affect the body, and therefore the mind, but not just simply the actual manner and motion of movement of the blood. As that if something is moving ever, it is always moving, such as the element that our blood is always moving, but it's not limited necessarily to what direction. So it may be moving in all kinds of different directions, but also in a certain coherence that gives an effect or an experience or a perception. So I think sometimes when we yawn, I've said in different videos that I think sometimes when you yawn, you're actually in danger, or you're somewhere around an intention that is potentially solemn and comfortable with injuring a person, or just serious. The potential for harm, but also the inclination for harm, or the comfort with harm in a person in or being in our vicinity. I think that's sometimes what makes us yawn. So sometimes I think when you're around someone or you think of someone that makes you yawn, one or the two of you had some form of a static between you, or like something of an intention, or what would be the grounds for an intention, the fertile impetus and cause of an intention to do harm between one another whether physically, personally, socially, professionally, on so ever subtle or great of a level, that actual intention and means of existing towards one another, we may get a whiff of that off of another, and even our intention towards another may give us our own whiff of ourselves that would make us yawn. That's my experience. But then I think that what that amounts to is that in the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, there some of where I got this idea about blood as like being very dynamic and moving like that is that in the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, they present it as though the blood moves either forward or backward. It may be that simple also because a lot of things are like a life and a death current. So you could say maybe your body's always like in a life current. You get turned on, now you're a little bit more in a death current, and the actual means of flowing of the blood changes. So you're not turned on now as the blood is flowing in this direction. What would happen if you dammed up something? It would start to swell and bulge, right? So when you're getting turned on, are you not somehow on a very fine level damming up the normal range of your blood to where it's not flowing or flowing differently, and now you're getting a bulge in the excess like that? So actually potentially the blood changes motion. I'm saying it's maybe moving in all kinds of dynamic ways as we cannot appreciate the word dynamic, but like I reached for when I said that the earth as a static component may be as reciprocal, dynamic, and also mobile and kinetic as anything that would move atop of it, if it is that support of what's kinetic and also dynamic, but more dynamic for being a support. The blood may be like that, but also it might be as simple as moving forward and backward, like in films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where she's saying that a certain poison reverses the blood flow. I'm saying maybe perhaps a certain perception or impetus or inspiration or idea or inclination or intention could also change the flow of the blood, whether that was perceived from or felt or experienced from a person, being, or thing without, or from within. Also, like ingesting something within, like a plant or some other living organism uh, input, or perceiving it visually through light, which is still affecting us on a profound level, and also consuming it that way as to change the uh the overall motion and intention of the what's significant. You may not be able to appreciate what's how dynamic the blood may be moving, but the intention of it you can appreciate and feel, and you get that as just a vibe, and what that vibe translates to mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. But uh spirit would refer to the breath that redoubles and reinforms all of that. Etherically would refer to the finer ranges of the body that we cannot always perceive with our mind, or um with our visual apparatus, or even some of our means of studying things that extend that range. According to Arthur Avalon, your scientific instruments extend the range of your perception. But I think that when you yawn, it may be a unique something has happened to the blood, and also it feels like an example that when you yawn, a lot of times it feels like momentum, like I actually just made myself yawn, but it feels like a little bit of a slowing down or a change of momentum or a shift that's like a relief kind of when you yawn. That actually might be because your blood is moving always in a lot of directions, but also with coherence. But then when you yawn, it slows down or it moves differently for a moment, and it gives that sensation of like momentum slowing down because the blood may be moving always like that, but the yawning is from the blood moving differently just for a moment because of some form of intention that's around us. That's what I think, and I think it has to do with death, with yawning, or it's not a cool thing usually if something makes you yawn. So this is just food for thought.